Tonight we're going to have a little bit of fun. I've got my man, Mr. Jeff Morgan, on the podcast. Jeff, how you doing?
I'll tell you, it's so good to see you again, Eric. Wonderful. Thanks so much.
All right, so I got to just tell people how me and you met, okay?
Sure.
So me and Jeff probably had seen each other's stuff, okay, like coming across each other on Facebook. We talked to a lot of the same people, but I had never met Jeff until CPAC. And the way the whole thing at CPAC went down was just nuts because we didn't expect it to happen. Jeff was sitting there recording CPAC. Next thing we know, Dad Talks got invited to a media booth, and we're like, we don't have any equipment. Jeff's like, I got my equipment. I'll set up. We'll do it. And buddy, did we. We tag teamed up, and we got in there and got those politicians and knocked down those interviews. And it would not have happened without this man on the screen right now. So I cannot thank you enough, my man.
Well, I want to thank you for letting me be a part of that. You know, I got to the place that I was like, I'm not sure what I'm here for because I wanted to help do something. And when you see a CPAC, there's so many thousands of people. There's so many people doing stuff. You're like, I've got a little camera. That's all I have here. And then when the opportunity opened up for you, and then because you actually had Brian Lee recording first, but then they had an issue with the audio. And I'm like, okay, I'll be the redundant person. That's okay. If we have something, at least we have something we can put out. But again, I just want to thank you for letting me be a part of that.
Well, and I think it was such a beautiful thing that even though that we hadn't met each other, we knew that we were both working towards the same common goal here. And Absolutely. It was like once we got the opportunity to make sure that the issues that we're talking about here could get in front of a bigger crowd and people that can make a difference, we hopped on it and we killed it. And dude, you spent a lot of time editing down those videos to make sure that people could see that content. Again, I cannot thank you enough. But enough about that. People has heard about what's going on at CPAC. Tonight, we want to talk about Mr. Jeff Morgan himself.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Okay, so the interesting, well, I don't know if it's an interesting thing or not, but you know, back in 2012, I went through a divorce that I was against. And, you know, Eric, when you go through a divorce and you start to think to yourself, it would be better off if I were accused of rape or murder. Because with rape or murder, I at least have due process and I at least have the presumption of innocence. When you go through a divorce in the state of Texas, you have neither. You are automatically guaranteed to lose 100%. There are no exceptions. You will lose. And the judges will tell you, but you know, we are trying to make a just and right division. But the problem is, why are you even doing this? In the state of Texas, marriage has absolutely no legal protection. If a spouse wants to file for divorce for any reason, for no reason, they can make up a reason. They can just, well, I need to find myself. The judge will, in fact, the judge not just will, the judge will, without exception, declare a divorce. And something is wrong with that because when you get married, the intention is that you get married for life. If I wanted to go to the state right now and say, you know, state of Texas, I want to get a marriage license for you, but I only want it to last for 5 years. And after 5 years, we're going to renew the marriage license if we want to, or else we can leave, kind of like an army contract, you know. And they say, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. But the reality is, Eric, that if you had a 5-year marriage license in the state of Texas, you would at least be guaranteed 5 years. Because usually when you get married, especially if you get married in the church under God, your commitment before God, before Jesus Christ is that, you know, you take your wife, you take your husband. Yes, there will be difficult times, but I am committed to this person for life. And the state of Texas says, no, 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 no. Nothing like that even makes a difference. Without exception, if anybody wants a divorce, any reason, no reason, they can make up a reason. The state of Texas will always, without exception, 100% of the time, side with that person. And from there, you know, the distribution of wealth or of your kids will take place. But it is one of the most unjust, immoral, evil systems. And in fact, if you go back to Bolshevik Russia, when Vladimir Lenin came to power, one of the things that he instituted first was the idea of unilateral divorce. And I think this is very important because we could talk about no-fault divorce. No-fault divorce is the marketing term. We always have to have the marketing term to make it sound like, oh, this is a good thing. No-fault divorce. People can get married. They can have a good divorce. They can just split their ways. They can go, separate like that. The reality is, in the state of Texas and in almost every single state of the union, no-fault divorce means forced divorce. It means divorce on demand. And that's what Vladimir Lenin imposed upon Bolshevik Russia, and he had one reason. He knew that by destroying the family, it would create an environment that he could impose communism on the entire society. Strong family is the number one defense to a lot of things that we see in our country today, whether it's the advance of socialism or communism, whatever you want to call it. Marriage and protecting marriage should be considered a national security issue. It should be considered an issue of utmost importance, more importance than COVID-19, by the way. This has been going on for 50 years. The states and the courts have been destroying our families, and we just yawn and, well, that's just the way it is. This is a crisis that has been building up for years and years and years. It's unjust. There are property rights involved with it. It's unconstitutional, and we don't talk about it, and that's a shame.
I'd have to agree. Everybody, before we get too deep into this, please do me a favor, because you help us get this conversation out to more people. Like and share this broadcast if you're watching this live, and help us get this conversation in front of more people, because we're about to talk about something I think that's not talked about enough, and that's the importance of marriage. Why is the divorce rate so high, Jeff?
So that's a very good question. Number one, I will tell you this, that after no-fault divorce, again, no fault is the marketing term, after forced divorce, unilateral divorce came to America, divorce rates skyrocketed. They just shot through the roof. And it's actually, if you want to look at it, I think that there's a lot more beneath that. There was the whole sexual revolution taking place, and some people were clamoring for it. But what it did, it made it so that people no longer had to work through problems. And I don't know if you've ever seen this meme, Eric, but there's a couple of older people that have been married for their entire life. And they basically said, the reason that they've been married so long is because we had to work to fix problems. We could not just have disposable marriages. We could not get rid of our spouse like we get rid of a set of winter clothes that we are getting rid of because now it's summer, or maybe we've gotten too fat, or maybe we've gotten too skinny, but that's the way it is right now, that we can change spouses without any repercussions. And the state gets involved. The state should be protecting marriage as an institution. The state does not. And there are financial incentives for the state. And as you know, I'm sure you probably have talked about the whole Title 4D incentive money, so that if there's a child support order that goes out, the state makes money. The state profits off of divorce. Why is that? That right there should be considered a conflict of interest. But what also doesn't happen is that the state does not tell people that every time a person gets a divorce, the tax bill goes up, because there are other costs the taxpayers pay. There was a study done in 2008, I believe it was, 2008, 2009, by Benjamin Scafidi out of the Georgetown or University of Georgia, something like that, an economist. And he said, conservatively speaking, at the time, between divorce and unwed childbearing, it cost taxpayers at least $112 billion a year. And he thought that the figure could be considerably higher, maybe even $165 billion a year. And that's increased because of inflation. But when you think about it, like a Hurricane Harvey or a Hurricane Katrina, it's a big disaster. We have to get federal funds in there. This happens every single year. Every single year, this is the taxpayer cost. But we've spread it throughout 50 states, and we lie to people about the costs. Well, they just can't get along. Marriage is a public policy issue that affects taxpayers. And I really think what politicians ought to do is be honest. Say, okay, here's how much divorce costs you. And every time you get a divorce, it's going to cost you this much more in taxes. I get a divorce and my neighbor pays taxes. My neighbor gets a divorce, I pay taxes. Well, that's not right. Why are you taking money from me? Well, we are taking money from you. We're just not telling you about this. So there are a number of reasons. I could go on and on and on. There are cultural reasons. There are the idea of morality and the commitment thing. And the other thing that people often don't talk about, Eric, is that children of divorce are much more susceptible to divorce. You get two children of divorce that married each other. What are the odds of them getting divorced in their lives? They increase tremendously. Divorce and the effects of divorce are transgenerational. And when if you go back to the Old Testament, God talks about divorce as being an act of violence, an act of bloodshed. And we've tried to say, well, let's have a kind divorce. Forced divorce, when you forcefully divorce your husband or your wife, it's as if you're shooting them or stabbing them. You have a garment filled with blood. That's the way God looks at it. And we have tried to sanctify it. We've tried to make it seem like it's so nice and pretty and they just can't get along. It's a bunch of garbage. And we need to get back to the roots of what marriage really is. Marriage should be an institution in which a mother and a husband and a wife come together. They have children. And as they have children, their commitment is to build marriage from a societal point of view commits a mother and a father together for the sake of the children, because children need a mother and a father. They need both parents. They don't need 50-50. They need 100-100. They need to have their intact mother and father together.
I like that one. And if anybody's watching that one, that needs to be made into a meme. They don't need 50-50. They need 100-100. That's the first time I've heard that. But, I